Okay, Sheikh, you can go ahead.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa usalli wa sallam ala Sayyid al-awwaleen wal akhirin. Nabiyyina Muhammadan wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man ihtada bihadihi wa stanna bi sunnati ila yawmiddin wa sallam tasliman kathira. Amma ba'd. All praise are due to Allah, Lord of the worlds, and peace and blessings be always and constantly showered upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad, the master of the first and the last, and his family, his companions, and all those who call to his way and establish his sunnah to the day of judgment. As to what follows, my beloved brothers and sisters, to our friends, our viewers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, Allah has blessed us with another opportunity to reflect upon pivotal moments in Islamic history. And that is a practice that people have done, that Muslims have done throughout Islamic history, to reflect upon what the Quran is saying, because the Quran is one third qasas, one third stories. We are learning the narratives and the stories of those who came before us, the stories of creation, the stories of the prophets, and the experiences of Prophet Muhammad SAW and his companions. This makes up a prophetic biography, a seerah, which is so explicit in giving us details that can serve us in our lives. His companions also and their followers, and right through history, there are certain points where you could say the history sort of pivoted. It changed from one condition into another condition, and it needed that fork in the road to really bring about that major change within the flow of Islamic history. And so we have been looking at the times after the Prophet ﷺ, and we were studying the Mediterranean during the time of the Crusades. And this takes us back to the 11th century AD. And you can see on the map there, the brown area represents the world of Islam. And that's the different factions and groups. The majority was the Sunnah, but there was a large Shia, extreme Shia community there in Egypt, North Africa and Egypt, called Fatimids. But for all intents and purposes, for the Christians, it was the lands of Islam. To the north, you see in the pink color what is left of the Roman Empire. But just to the right of it, in the more reddish pink, that is the Byzantine or the Eastern Orthodox Roman Empire. The original Romans had lost their authority because of attacks that had gone on them. And so it was shifting over. The power started to shift over to the Byzantine Empire. And uh, that was the Mediterranean during this time. And what you have to realize, contrary to how we look at the world today, because we tend to look at the northern countries, Europe and the countries of the north, as the developed countries, the first world. Davos, these are the rich, organized people. And the people to the south, this is like the third world. And so this is the confusion and underdevelopment. But it was the opposite in those days because the Roman Empire had fallen and there was nothing left of the major civilizations in Europe except really a small amount of the progress that the Romans had made. And so the average person in Europe was living a very difficult life. Disease was rampant, corruption, was endemic, widespread. And so it was in the lands of Islam, especially those in the what is now known as the Middle East, North Africa, that was flourishing at this time. And so the Europeans then looked toward the Muslim world uh, for progress and also for a way to come out of the misery that they were living in. This took us to the what is known as the First Crusade. And this was in 1095, as we learned, when Pope Urban II at Clermont in France, he made this declaration. This was different than pilgrimages that Christians made before. He said, in this case, whoever for devotion alone, but not to gain honor or money, goes to Jerusalem to liberate the church of God, can substitute the journey for all penance. In other words, this is similar to what Muslims would call Hajj Mabrur. And Hajj Mabrur, when you do your pilgrimage properly and Allah accepts it, then you come back like a newborn baby. And so, in their minds, to go on this crusade to liberate their lands and to get the true cross of Christ that they believe was there, this was a source of complete penance. Reality was, Christians had been living from the time of Isa alayhi salam in that area, and they had mingled with the Jewish people and the Muslim majority of the people in those lands, and there was no problem religiously between them. The real reason for their attack was economic. It was political. It was to gain the riches of the East, the strategic positions, and to take themselves from darkness into light. And so, as we learn, the First Crusade began. But this was not a military operation, it was mainly untrained peasant people. And you could call it the People's Crusade. And it was led by Peter the Hermit, who was a monk. And because it was not an organized military expedition and going into the Muslim lands as though they're going to take over, they were utterly destroyed by the Seljuk Turks under Kilij Arslan. And that led to the second phase of the First Crusade. Now, this is the organized phase. 5 European princes came together and they brought close to 100,000 people, including non combatants. They wore that red cross, that was their symbol. And they came into the area and they plundered and they pillaged until they reached Jerusalem itself. Now, you would say with the Muslim world having reached all the way to China, remember, far north to Chechnya, deep south, Swahili coast, North Africa, even down into West Africa, where are the Muslims? Big cities like Egypt, Baghdad, where are the Muslims? They were divided. And because of the division and the love of the dunya, fear of death, hatred of meeting Allah, they became what the Prophet defined as gutha as-sail. It's like the foam and the scum, on the water. And so the Crusaders were able to come right into the Levant, which is the greater Syria area, and they went and they laid siege to Jerusalem and Quds itself. This siege went on for 1 month and 8 days, from June 1099 to July 15, 1099. And unfortunately, the siege broke into the city. Thousands of Muslims were massacred, men, women, children, regardless. Now, think about this in relationship to what's happening today in the same region. Thousands were killed. Even Jewish people were massacred as well. The holy sites were desecrated. And this was a shame and disgrace for the Muslim world. It was like a shock. People could not even believe that this was actually happening, but it did happen. And it was a stain on our history. And so the Crusaders took over coastal areas, and you could see 5 main principalities that they had: the county of Edessa, and there was Antioch, and there was Tripoli, and there was Jerusalem. And below that, of course, was the Fatimids. This is the Shia Caliphate. Then you had the Seljuks to the east. And so they dug themselves in, and they actually took over these areas and built forts. And they used the Mediterranean in order to start shipping goods. Because remember, that's what they wanted. They wanted a way in, get those silks, get that gold, get those perfumes, the spices, and even connect with China. So this is what they were looking for. And so they used that coastline primarily in order to get themselves or raise themselves to a higher level. But the pivotal moment that we looked at last week came in, and that is the rise of Imad Zengi, rahimahullah, who was a great Turkish leader. And Allah raised him up with the spirit of jihad, and that, of course, we know is resistance. There is no holy war, there is no killing innocent people, but resistance. And he was able to focus. He started off as the Atabeg of Mosul in Iraq, and by 1144, he took back Edessa. And remember, if you look back at your different states, that was a very important state that went right into present day Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. So Imad ad-Din Zengi started a movement. And this is critical, really, for us to recognize because he is really underestimated and downplayed, the Zengi family, and the things that they actually did. Now, in his career, Imad ad-Din Zengi at one point was struggling against a corrupted Khalifa, and he was about to be killed at the banks of the Tigris. And Najmuddin Ayyub, who was a Kurdish leader who was in charge of the garrison on the Tigris, he saw this event happening that Imad ad-Din was being attacked, by this army, and it appeared really unjust. So Ayyub gave him boats, and they ferried Imad ad-Din across. This made a great unity between the Zengids, who are Turkish, and the Ayyubids, who are Kurdish. It was an amazing bond that was developed between the two families. And Imad ad-Din continued his struggle, and unfortunately, but by the will of Allah, suddenly he died. He was assassinated in 1146, and his son Nureddin Zengi took control. Nureddin had an amazing personality. He was a pious person. He did not love the life of this world, and he dedicated his life to liberating the land and to uniting Syria and Egypt, whatever he possibly could, and to take back the lands of the Crusaders. So now, here we are now looking at what happened in the Middle East and in this area. This is what is called the time of the Second Crusade. And that's based upon the fact that the fall of Edessa, this really was confusion for the Europeans. It was confusion because that was really a protective principality that they had. And so there were calls for a new crusade to come about. And these calls came about with, France is generally the basis for the Crusaders. And this time they were calling for a three-pronged crusade. And this is a point, it's an important point that a lot of people don't understand. You need to connect the dots. There were actually three crusades that went out at this time. One crusade that they call Reconquista, but this was the crusade down into Spain and Portugal, Al-Andalus, because this was Islamic territory. Now, we tend to look at Muslims as being from the east, but no, this is to the west of France and Germany, and it was an Islamic empire. And so they launched a crusade against this area, and you can read that when you read about Al-Andalus and Andalusia and what happened in that area. So that was actually a crusade. Another crusade went to the north, to the Germanic people who were reverting to their pagan beliefs. They refused to accept Christianity. So a crusade was also sent to the north. Okay, but the major crusade in 1147, this is what was initiated by Eugene III, who was elected as the Pope. So he issued a decree, December 1145. He called for the crusade. And he said, but this time it needs to be more organized and centrally controlled You see, he wants it to be more organized. And he said he wants the armies to be led by the strongest kings of Europe, not just princes and people who are looking for adventure. No, the kings themselves. So he wants a political crusade to develop, and that crusade actually began. And they attacked Muslim lands coming in from different areas. If you look back at your map, you will see how the red lines. This is of the different Crusader groups. If you see the yellow line, which is sort of from Germany, that's Conrad III of Germany. He went from Germany straight down into Turkey. And then you will see Louis VII, who went from France, and then he went in. So there were different routes that they took. They centralized themselves, they were organized, and they moved into not only the Turkey side, but straight into the areas that they had conquered previously. So they want to reestablish themselves, and they want to stop any advancements made by the Muslims. Okay, so this is the Second Crusade. Nureddin, who was still leading that resistance movement started by Imad Zengi, Nureddin was blessed with a series of lightning fast victories. And this really culminated in the Battle of Inab on the 29th of June, 1149. Nureddin had established himself as one of the greatest leaders in the Muslim world at the time. And so he was able to hold back the Crusaders, take more of their places, hold them to the coastline. And so this was an amazing job that Nureddin was doing, and he was uniting people under the banner of resistance. But there was a turn of events, and that was that February 10th, 1163, a new king was crowned in Jerusalem, Amalric. And Amalric had a different kind of spirit. He was highly organized, highly trained, highly motivated, and he began to struggle against the Zengis, and he actually defeated them at the Battle of Buqayya. And then he made a series of major invasions of Egypt. Now, think about Egypt. Egypt at that time was probably, after Baghdad, it was the largest, most developed Muslim town in terms of the wealth that was coming out of it, the scholarship, the strategic position. So he launched a series of invasions. This is Amalric. So this is a very serious individual there who is launching himself. Now, remember now, again, the Fatimid Caliphate, they called it a caliphate, although the Fatimids were extremists, and they were Ismailis. They were outside of even the mainstream Shia, who call themselves the Twelvers or the Itna Sharia. The Ismailis, they were totally out of it. And their leadership, their base started in Mahdiya, which is in Tunis, Tunisia, but then it moved over to Egypt. They quickly lost that side where Tunisia was because there were Muslim forces that were there, that defeated them. But Egypt became their stronghold. And Al-Qahira, Cairo, became the capital of the Fatimids. Okay, this is back in 969. And so look at the extent of their rule. You see, they go deep south, down into the Sudan. They also go over to the Levant. So they actually took over sections of Syria and Lebanon and Palestine. They even were controlling Mecca and Medina. They did not stop Islam. They were allowing regular Islamic rule. And Muslims were so divided that they could not actually take them out of their leadership. And that is the reality. So Amalric now is attacking Egypt. And this is so serious that even though Nureddin is leading the Ahl Sunnah, the mainstream body resistance to the Crusaders, he recognized that even though the Fatimids at different points were in a negative, they even fought the Sunnah people, he had to do something. Because to lose Egypt was to lose a strategic place. Now, these pictures that I've got here for you, and much of Cairo's older buildings were actually built by the Fatimids themselves. And that's amazing when you think about Egypt, because you think Egypt is the home of the Ahl Sunnah, but no, originally it was, of course, in the time of Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anh, Sahaba's time, but the Fatimids took over. And although they're not the majority of the people, still the majority is just following mainstream Islam. They seized power. And the buildings, look at the size of their buildings that they constructed, there in Cairo. They changed it, from an important city to one of the greatest cities in terms of building structures in the Muslim world at the time. So Nureddin felt that he needed to do something. So he intervened. And despite the fact that there was a difference with uh, the Sunni and the Shia, this was an issue which was concerning the whole of the Muslim world. And so Nureddin then sent a strike force into that area, which would be led by his general Asaduddin Shirkuh. Now, remember the Ayyubids and the Zengids. So Asaduddin was the brother of Ayyub, and he was a great leader. He's described, although he was short in stature, he was very tough and strong, and he was such a commanding leader. His followers loved him. He lightning fast victories he was well known for. And so Nureddin then sent Shirkuh to lead the forces into Egypt. And although they were not huge in number, they were so lightning fast and so organized and so courageous that they were able to open up territories and to defeat the Christians at different points. So Shirkuh brought along with him his nephew, Salaheddin. So this is where Salaheddin now enters the scene. He is the son of Ayyub. Remember, they are the Kurdish people who saved the Zengid family. Strong relationship. Salaheddin then grows up in Damascus, and he's being trained, by the best fighters, and Shirkuh took him in. And so a lot of the strategies that you see Salaheddin develops later on come directly from Shirkuh. This is another name that you need to remember when you understand Islamic history, because this is part of the pivot now. This is part of the major pivot that is coming about, because remember, the Christians have launched the Second Crusade. They are in big waves. Amalric now is organizing more people to come from Europe and for wave after wave to hit Cairo and to take over the whole Muslim world. The Fatimids were in disorder, and one of their wazirs, and a wazir is like the main chief minister, his name was Shawa. He turned against the Fatimid caliph, al-Adid. He turned against him, and so he was deposed. And he was so treacherous, this Shawa character, so treacherous that he actually joined forces with Amalric. And they planned together, inside and outside, how they would destroy Egypt and take over much of the Muslim world. And so Shirkuh then found himself struggling against renegade Fatimids on one hand and Crusaders on the other hand, and sometimes both at the same time. Shirkuh was tireless, and the famous siege of Bilbis in August of 1164, Shirkuh was not being defeated on the ground. He was going from place to place. He was establishing himself. He was defeating the Crusaders, defeating the Fatimids. And after this, a decisive battle came about. And this was the Battle of Barbain in 1167. Decisive battle. And after this and a string of smaller confrontations, in 1169, Shawa was poisoned. But Sherku, he passed away, he died. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Sherku was dead. The Fatimids at that point, in disarray, still hoping to have the leadership of the Ahl Sunnah, the main body of Muslims, but then not to be dominated. You see, they wanted this thing where you have them there, you have the Sunnis there to do the fighting, but you remain in control. So they thought that Salaheddin would be the perfect person to take over as the main wazir under the Fatimid Caliph. Okay, now Salaheddin accepts this position, but this is a contradiction because Nureddin did not accept the Fatimid rule. He was saving Egypt in order to save the Muslim world. But it was strategic that Salaheddin took this position as the wazir, and Nureddin recognized this, gave him reinforcements. And a major attack, remember Amalric, remember the Crusaders, they laid siege to Damietta. And this is a port, this is in Egypt itself. And this was a major siege. And Salaheddin, rahimahullah, was key in this. He held the fort. He saved Egypt. He saved that entrance into the Muslim world. And he became famous because of this. But this brought not only fame, but it brought threats because the assassins, remember the Hashashin, the assassins of the extreme Ismaili group living in Alamut in Syria and high in the mountains, they tried to assassinate him twice because they were always trying to destabilize the leadership of the Ahl Sunnah. But Salaheddin lived by the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And at that point, Salaheddin, as the wazir, rises because the Fatimid Khalifa died. And so Salaheddin then took over the country because the only ruler the Fatimids left was a young man. So Salaheddin took over effective rule of Egypt. The Khalifa of the Abbasids gave him the title of Sultan. Now, this is a title not used much. The Seljuks, only major people will get the title of Sultan. And so he became the Sultan of Egypt. And this that you see in the picture is an actual coin that was minted in Egypt for Salaheddin al-Ayyubi, rahimahullah. So this is an actual coin. You see the Arabic writing and whatnot. So this is a very important thing in terms of power. Now, when he was declared, as the Sultan, he set about to reestablish Egypt, to clean it up, to purge it, and to get it set for his major intention, which was to open up Jerusalem. What did he do? First, he established the Sunnah. So Al-Azhar University, which was a Fatimid university, it was now taken over by the Muslims. And he established the Shafi'i rite. This is the madhab of Imam al-Shafi'i, rahimahullah, the Sunnah. He established the Sunnah. The adhans that were being called by the Fatimids in their masjids, remember, they built the big masjids of Cairo at that time, and the Shia adhan, has some bid'ah in it where they say Ashhadu anna Ali waliyullah at the end. So that's not the Sunnah. It's an innovation. So Salaheddin changed it back to the Sunnah. Salaheddin also made sure that in the court system, all judges were no longer Ismailis. All the judges were Sunnah, and the law would be administered according to the Quran and the Sunnah. He also took control of the Fatimid royal family. And he did not slaughter them, but he arrested them and he banished them to make sure that they would not try to do a coup or to take back over. public lectures given in masajid, given in madrasas, given on the streets. Public lectures were done in the Sunnah. No more Ismaili Batini creed. Remember the Batiniya? None of that creed. Okay, and so all the public lectures, and then the Jummah itself. That Jummah, instead of being read in the name of the Fatimids, it was read in the name of Abbasids. Okay, so this is a major move that Salaheddin, rahimahullah, is able to accomplish there in Egypt. So he didn't just go and immediately attack Jerusalem. No, there were some things that had to be done on the ground. So he established his base, and then from there, he started to move off. So now, who is Salaheddin himself? This is an artist's conception of who he might be. There's a few pictures on coins and whatnot. Allah knows best. But Salaheddin was born Yusuf ibn Ayyub, right? Salaheddin is like the nickname, okay? And he was born in the Iraqi city of Tikrit. So this is in the northern Kurdish section of Iraq today, okay? And according to Bahauddin ibn Shaddad, who was the main biographer of Salaheddin, he was a pious Muslim and he loved to listen to the Quran. And so even at night, he would have his guards, who were generally the Mamluks. They were the trained warrior soldiers. He would have them read a section at nighttime so he could listen to it. He prayed on time, but he was also very strict with his faith. He hated philosophers. He did not like philosophy, and especially those who were denying attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That all the names and attributes should be concrete and should be established. So he was straight with his faith. And that's an important thing, about it's part of the pivot, because the Muslim world is in turmoil. There's confusion, they're losing land, there's Amir fighting Amir. There is different Batini ideas. Remember the Fatimids that are there. So this now is a major pivot coming in with Salaheddin. And again, people who were materialists, people who were fighting for the dunya and do not know, he didn't like this. He wanted a balanced Islam that has given you dunya and akhirah. So this is, and think about today, what we need in the Muslim world. Unapologetically Muslim. At the same time, dealing with the life of this world. And he was open-minded. He supported the Khanqa. This is what they call today the Sufi hostels. He allowed the people of Tasawwuf to be there, long as they stayed within Sharia. He did not allow the wild, non-Sharia based Sufism to be there. But those who were into their tazkiyatun nafs and their spirituality, he allowed them to do that. He especially encouraged madrasas for fiqh, madrasas for Islamic studies. And so this is the balanced Islam that we need today, actually, to unite the Muslim world. And one of the key aspects of Salaheddin was his clinging to the jihad, to the resistance. That was his life. Resistance to the Crusaders. Bring back the lands of Islam. Liberate Jerusalem. And so Salaheddin was winning victories and starting to organize himself. Now back to the Christians. The Christians were going through changes as well. And in Jerusalem itself, Baldwin IV became the king of Jerusalem around 1174. But he was 13 years old and he was a leper. And leprosy, as you know, is a debilitating, incurable disease. But because he was in the royal family, he was put into this position as the king of Jerusalem. They didn't expect him to live very long. So he had a co-ruler as well, Baldwin V. Okay. Now, when Baldwin IV died, Baldwin V became the sole ruler of the area upon this death in 1185. Okay, And there was also Raymond III of Tripoli. There were the Knights Templar, who were a power force in that area at the same time. All of these different elements were bringing life back, to the Christians and making them more dangerous than before. But Raymond was smart. Raymond negotiated a truce with Salaheddin. But this was being broken because the Knights Templar were attacking the Hujjaj, the pilgrims going to Mecca. They were defiling Muslim lands and the women of Islam. And they even went to the point where they made the threat to take Medina and to defile and steal the body of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. That's a red line. That's a serious red line. Okay, and but this king, the king passed away in 1186. This Baldwin, his mother, Sibylla, and her husband, Guy of Lusignan. He was a dim-witted, good-looking, Frenchman who was totally into himself, a narcissist, as you recall today. They were crowned as the king and queen of Jerusalem. That's 1186. Okay, but Salaheddin was winning victories. He was persistent. He continued on, and but Guy de Lusignan had another intention. Okay, Salaheddin is all over the place. The Battle of Al Fulay. He a slight defeat. He continues, and he increased his attacks on the Christians, on the Franks, in the Battle of Cresson, which is in 1187. So Guy de Lusignan, he decides he's going to throw everything at Salaheddin. He's an arrogant person. So he gathered the largest Christian army ever assembled out of Jerusalem to go forward to Salaheddin. Salaheddin was a cunning, crafty leader. Remember, coming out of the school of the Zengids. And this is an important point because your leaders don't come out of a vacuum. We have to think about this today with our youth, that our youth have to be trained for what is coming. Train your youth for major confrontations happening in the world. No more pies in the skies. Now is the time for all Muslims to be trained in as many skills as possible. And so Salaheddin then, through subtle tactics and the arrogance of Guy, he lured this huge Crusader army into a very inhospitable desert terrain. And that is a place called Hattin. And so it is in that area that they were lured in, and Salaheddin intelligently now cut off their water supplies, rained them with arrows. The Christians were going out of their minds. The scorpions and snakes were biting them at night. They didn't have water. And so they were losing their senses. And so they rushed toward the forces of Salaheddin. This is a decisive battle of Hattin, which is on the 4th of July, 1187. It's a crucial date. So the next time you hear 4th of July, it's not because of the independence of America. The key thing for Muslims is the Battle of Hattin. And this was a pivot. Your pivot is now moving strong now. Because in this battle, the Muslims were able to totally defeat the Crusaders. Totally defeat them. It's a decisive battle that should never be forgotten. And because of this, Palestine started to fall. Syria, all of the areas. Salaheddin was taking back one section after another section. And finally, the siege of Jerusalem began. And that was on the 20th of September, 1187. Salaheddin surrounded the city. He was bargaining with Balian of Ibelin. This was on the 2nd of October. They started to negotiate. Balian tried to put up some resistance, but uh, the siege was finally broken. Salaheddin, let him understand, do you want everybody to die? Okay, this is how important this place is. We will allow you to leave with dignity. We're not going to slaughter you. And because Salaheddin was so well known because of his character and because of his piety and his sincerity and his honesty, Balian and the Christians accepted this and they surrendered the city. And this came about then, 1187, 2nd of October. According to some sources, on the 19th of October, Urban III was the Pope. He died. It was such a trauma that he died when he heard that Jerusalem was gone. Salahuddin Rahimahullah, it's a major victory for Islam. Pivot. This is your pivot coming in. What would happen with this pivot? When the first negative pivot happened during the First Crusade, remember, when the Crusaders came down into this area, they destroyed and they killed and they maimed it is said that some sections of the city, their horses were knee deep in blood. That's how horrible it was. Salahuddin took over and did not institute a slaughter. He spared the Christians. He treated them in an honorable way, and those who wanted to leave the city could do in peace. And he allowed them to take their personal possessions, on their animals. Those who could afford to pay a modest ransom, they paid the ransom, but many people could not. Salahuddin freed them. Salahuddin showed respect for all religions. Some of the people within his leadership wanted to destroy the churches because of what the Christians had done. Remember, 88 years, no adhan was being called. Our masjids, Mashal Aqsa, they use it for a stable. Pigs are running around. They defile the area. Salahuddin was not like this. And Salahuddin sets an example. It was such an example that he was beloved in Europe, that even the Europeans loved this man because he had better character than their own crusaders. So he was an example of a tolerant, progressive way of practicing Islam. That's the inclusive faith that we need today. And restraint, but strength. Salahuddin was resilient. Salahuddin did not rest at night. He did not rest. And he gave his life to liberate. That's the spirit that we need today, right now, to be reinfused in the Muslim world, to come out in our leaders instead of being rabbits, to come forward and to deal with what they need to deal with. And what is the end result? It's not the slaughter of Jews, not the slaughter of Christians. It's a tolerant Islam. It's justice established, no doubt, but to liberate the territory and to give freedom of religion to all people. And so Jerusalem was spared. And Salahuddin, Rahimahullah, continued on with lightning fast victories. He was able to open up many more of the lands, taking back the Christian principalities until only the bare coastal regions were actually left. And this rose another crusade. A major crusade was then called. And this one was actually led by Richard the Lionhearted. Now you may have heard of him because of England, right? Richard the Lionhearted. And he came down with a huge crusade to come down to deal with Salahuddin. Salahuddin held them off. He held the ground. A truce was made. They were not able to retake Jerusalem. And Richard had to go back to England without taking the sacred land of Jerusalem. Salahuddin, Rahimahullah, only around 56 years old or so, passed away in Damascus. His life was in the saddle. a great leader, a pivot change where unity came to the Muslims, where the Sunnah was no longer under attack by a major Shiite dynasty, the Fatimids. No, that is gone now. The Sunnah is the major rule of the whole of the Muslim world, except for the Batiniya fraction groups. The assassins were still around, and some of the other smaller groups. But this is a pivot back to the Sunnah, even though Muslims had gone through tremendous struggle, tremendous suffering. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed us to go from darkness into light. That is the pivot that we need today in the Muslim world. This is a great example. And that's the reason why you'll hear many Arabic speaking people say, Wa Salaheddin, Wa Salaheddin, meaning, oh Salaheddin, where is Salaheddin? Where is he? We want him to come back. And we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would allow him to come back in the hundreds to open up our lands. So I want to open up the floor for any questions that anybody may have concerning this pivot of Salaheddin al-Ayyubi, rahimahullah. So let us look back at what we have here in the chat. Are there any questions that anybody has there in the chat? Floor is open.
I don't see any on my end, Sheikh.
One is saying, can you tell me the name of the book you referenced in your lecture a few weeks ago? Are you selling it? There was a book that I said, and that is An-Nasihatul Kafiya, The Complete Advice in Sincerity. And yes, you can, get that book. Go to my website, hakimquick.com. Okay, and there, you can get complete advice and sincerity. You can also download some of the courses that we have that may be of interest to you. This information is also available at the Islamic Institute of Toronto website, islam.ca. You can go there as well to get some of the courses and some of the information. And keep in touch with us on our Facebook page, Sheikh Abdullah Hakim Quick. It's a public figure that's on Facebook. Keep in touch with us as we are moving through Black History Month and continuing on, with our studies. And so we will leave this class here tonight. We'll announce whether we'll continue next week or not, because we are now coming very close to the month of Ramadan, and all of our teachings are now shifting into the Ramadan teachings. But we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have mercy on this ummah, and we pray that Allah Azza wa Jal, with the coming of the month of Ramadan, would make it a source of blessing and a source of victory, for the Muslims, and to raise up hundreds of Salaheddins, to unite the believers, and to help the innocent people of this ummah. May Allah give dignity and honor to the children of the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, especially in Palestine and Gaza. May Allah give dignity and honor to the women of this ummah, especially in Palestine and Gaza, and to the men. May Allah strengthen them and unite the Muslims throughout the Muslim world. And may Allah take our confused political leaders from darkness into light. That spirit of the Zengis, that spirit of Salaheddin, we need it to come back. We pray that Allah would raise it up in the ummah and take us all from darkness into light. I leave you with these thoughts, and I ask Allah to have mercy on me and you. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.